Hello, everybody. I think I'm live this time. Apologies if you looked at that last upload, which was just 6 minutes of silence because I hadn't added myself to my own live stream. However, the reason you're looking at a photograph of me is because the lighting in here isn't that good and I didn't want to turn the camera on. However, yes, just to let you know, this week's show, The Perpetual Crisis, is now available at windowsontheworld.net and will be linked under this short introduction just when I have finished. In fact, I can probably do it now. I've just had a bit of a problem trying to get into my own account, which has caused me a little bit of grief. That's why I was silent in the last one. Something went wrong. So yeah, we're looking at this show and it's really interesting actually because the propaganda now is so ridiculous, and we get into that a bit, but also how the mainstream media, in this case, the Daily Mail, actually put out an article very recently about the Club of Rome and its limits to growth, which was all about computer modeling. And guess what's happened recently? Yes, more computer modeling. Well, from the IPCC onto Neil Ferguson, all it does is fulfill an agenda. Computer modeling just drives the agenda forward because, of course, it's all made up. Is it really? Yes. Look at what Neil Ferguson predicted with the COVID crisis. Look what he predicted previously. Look at the failed predictions of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was there mainly to drive global change, not climate change. But of course, we are now in a much accelerated version of that. And we get into that tonight. And there's a lot of information in that show, a lot of information in our recent shows too, about how the narrative is controlled. And I think we've actually gone into that so much over the last several years that I think we've covered the whole system and the way it works. So do go back into the archive, go to windowsontheworld.net homepage. Do join us on Odyssey rather than YouTube. We do not upload our Sunday shows to YouTube. We put them on Odyssey and, of course, on Spreaker, which is where this show originates, the one that's going to be linked underneath here. And I've got some re-uploading to do. I'm going to upload a few shows which have been taken down, and they will definitely be on Odyssey. The ones which will be uploaded to YouTube may be a bit shorter, but we're going to put everything on Odyssey. And also, I've got a great interview with Jam for Freedom, which is a group of musicians going around trying to say that the lockdown is not what they want, which is great because the globalist show business set are all on board with it, aren't they? The globalist Stones, Lady Gaga. Oh, yes, they're all advertising the population reduction. They're all part of the Sustainable Development Goals, in fact, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's what we get into in this show, bit of the background on that and how the mainstream media actually put out the goals of the globalists. But if you can't join the dots, you're never going to get it. And we do look briefly at the propaganda that's going on. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. Some people actually were listening to the last one. What was interesting was I got a lot of likes on it, and I don't think you could hear me. So I don't know what that says, but usually our information is pretty sound. I am going to be, as I say, re-uploading quite a lot of stuff, and we're getting into what's coming out of the press, really. Such a depressing time to be alive, says Aaron Mason. Well, I go through days where I think the situation may well be hopeless, but that doesn't mean that it's depressing. It's kind of interesting in some ways because we are in some end time scenario. And if these criminals get away with it, then that's going to be another interesting scenario, because what they're going to do, I don't believe is going to work. The fourth industrial revolution, the Great Reset. These people have not really got that much upstairs. They have a kind of technocratic vision of how things should work. But as we know, the whole thing was driven really by computer modeling. And that's what this show tonight's all about. It's about limits to growth. This MIT computer program from the 70s, which predicted that we'd run out of stuff. There'd be too many people. There'd be too much pollution. Well, of course, these all turned into drivers under sustainable development. This is what Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 was all about. And of course, the COVID action plan has merely sped that up 1,000%. Yes. It's great to be alive at the moment, I think. And if you're in Northern Ireland, go to the GPO building, outside the GPO building, to protest against mandatory vaccination for health workers. And that's on the 24th. It was my friend Kieran Boyle in Northern Ireland who actually gave me that bit of information. I'm going to be doing some talks with them. And there's a lot of people all over the place actually getting organised. So they're doing it under the radar. They're not doing it on Facebook. They're not doing it on social media. They're not taking selfies of themselves. They're actually preparing for, well, what some people say could be the worst, but some people who are in the know might say is going to happen. So, yeah, no, it's not being taken. Number one is being taken down. They're winning. Number one is being taken down. Okay. Yeah, well, it's great to know that people have caught on to the catchphrase of my nemesis or alter ego, Common Law Malcolm. And there's a lot of that about. I got sent an email about that today, actually, about somebody still trying to claim their birth certificate bond. And it was a different version of the usual one. But if you want to know anything about that and you're interested, I did a lot of research years ago with a researcher called Franco Collins, who has a website called Ucadia. And we used to speak very often about this stuff. And Frank sent me loads of information, all the different versions of the Births, Deaths and Registrations Act and all the rest of it. Where does it get you? Well, not very far, but it's interesting. If you're into the occult nature of it, take a look at an article at windowsontheworld.net called Are You a Pauper? And that explains how the poor laws of the 1500s were incorporated into what became the passport through a thing called a certificate of settlement. And basically, it was the identification document of the time. And it was very similar. But if you look on your passport, what type of passport have you got? If you take a look, it will say type of passport P, unless you've got a diplomatic passport. And there are several types of passport according to the Home Office. However, when I asked the Home Office what the P stood for, they said it stood for electronically readable passport. Well, the passport I had before that was not electronically readable. It still said P. It actually stands for pauper, because you can only be controlled in this way and ask for passage to somewhere, to an external authority, if you are a pauper, in other words, not a holder of property. Very interesting stuff. Went into it massively, and I've done several shows on it. There's a great article called What is Common Law, windowsontheworld.net. In the articles section, it's linked to several other articles, including Freeman versus Legal Fiction, which goes into this birth certificate stuff. Then there's another one that's called Is a Birth Certificate a Death Certificate? And yes, it is in some respects. What does this mean in the bigger scheme of things? Not a lot. But people seem to think that because it's the way of looking at the GDP of the country, in other words, the worth of the person against the GDP of the country and for the GDP of the country, in other words, they are going to be part of this gross domestic product. They think that you are worth a certain amount. That may or may not be true, but it's a legal fiction. It's got nothing to do with you. You were incorporated at birth, and no, you can't claim it back. And anybody who knows anybody who's claimed it back, let me see their bank account, because this has been going on for 15. Well, actually, Mark, Malcolm's here. Hang on. Well, actually, Mark, I think you may be wrong. I think you're very negative in what you're saying these days, Mark, because in actual fact, there is circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence that it is the case that we are traded on the international stock market. Actually, Malcolm, you are right, because I found myself on Fidelity Investments. I was bond number 429 in Maryland, America, with a QSIT number. Really, Mark? So why are you so negative about us all being able to claim this money back that we are absolutely owed by the system? Because, Malcolm, it's a legal fiction. It's got nothing to do with you. You may think that it's some kind of entitlement that you've got, but it's got nothing to do with you, Malcolm, honestly. It's a fiction. It's about a projection that could be invested in the future. Well, Mark, I think you may be wrong, because I've been listening to some very knowledgeable people, and I used to work in the civil service, Mark, and actually these people to me are entirely credible. They are people like me, and in fact, Mark, they are people like you too. Oh, thanks, Malcolm. Well, I'm sure we'll be getting into that. But yeah, I do get sent a lot of this stuff still, that people are going down these rabbit holes. It's a bit too late for that, because I don't know whether you've noticed, folks, but it's a genocide. Yeah, it is actually. And it's an ongoing one. Also, we cover that in the show, The Perpetual Crisis, which will be linked under this, and also windowsontheworld.net in the live shows section, because there's a very interesting video I looked at today, which many of you may have seen, I don't know, but it was by a fella called, let's have a look now. It's Doctors for, the number 4, Doctors for COVIDethics.org. And it's a Professor Susharit Bhakdi, and he explains recent findings that fundamentally change the COVID narrative, and they really do. It's along the lines of things you may have heard about the mRNA spike protein, but he's really explaining it in a very clear and concise way. And what we're looking at here is pretty scary stuff, but that also brings into perspective what we've been talking about, the fork in the road. Ultimately, this is your choice. That's ultimately what it is. And the fork in the road is where the people with a brain cell and maybe a soul still intact are going to go into a different direction. And I do believe that. It sounds a bit philosophical, but I'm sure it's true. And it does seem to be true. We do seem to be getting a big polarity with this. And there's a lot of people, actually, that you've probably found this as well, from your past, who are now asking you questions. First, of course, you're a conspiracy theorist and you're exaggerating. You've got a tinfoil hat. And next thing is, guess what? You become a consultant. Hi from Communist Island. Yeah, well, that's sad, isn't it? Isn't that sad? Well, there's only us who can turn it around. I mean, that sounds a bit banal, but I think with proper planning and a little bit of strategy, a lot still can be done. Yes, somebody put earlier on, it is very depressing. Let's have a look what Jason's just said. 10,991 USA deaths from the jabs listed on the government website. Yeah, well, and this, of course, would be just the beginning. The COVID scam is the beginning, says William Noel. In the solar activity could be DNA, from solar activity could be DNA. Well, we can get into all that. We have to really stick to what we know at the moment. But yeah, I've got loads of stuff that I'm going to be putting up over the next few weeks as well. And the biggest changes ever are happening right now. The biggest changes ever in history are happening now. But nothing complicated is going on. There's nothing complicated about what's happening at all. It's just psychological destabilization and really, in effect, abuse. And people who are suffering this abuse are really enabling their abusers. But basically, we know that the date's set for the future when there's meant to be freedom. We're only going to be taken away at the last minute. But as the mainstream like to say, there are always loopholes. And if you read the small print, you may find that what's printed in the mainstream press is absolute rubbish as far as things like vaccination passports, etc., are concerned. A lot of people are thinking that they can't travel. Well, you actually can. Yeah, we've also covered quite a few news stories in the opener of this show, The Perpetual Crisis. But there will be no remedy except really being able to survive outside the plan. And that's really what I've always thought. I've been rather kind of disappointed with some of the people that I know and the directions they've gone in, because they're having their energy harvested. And energy harvesting, of course, is part of the Global Action Plan. They want you to waste your energy and basically become disillusioned and give in. And of course, it also wears out the brain. But yeah, the circus of circumstances around the plan are of no real importance. They are just a distraction from the outcome. And yes, we talk in this show really about how things have been covered recently in the Daily Mail. Everything is actually put into the mainstream media, even the stuff I've been talking about for 15 years. We're talking about the Club of Rome, Limits to Growth, which then went into a document called The First Global Revolution in the early 90s. So that's what we're going to be talking about on this show this evening. And if you've got any information that you'd like to share, please send it to info@windowsontheworld.net. And we're going to be re-uploading and uploading some new stuff this week. So thanks everybody for listening. I'm going to link that show, The Perpetual Crisis, under this for tonight, and stay in touch and join our Discord channel. You can do that at windowsontheworld.net. It's Discord Mark Windows, and there's some really interesting people on there. So thanks a lot, everybody, and good night.